new arrangement of the universe.
But the argument was just beginning, and Galileo utterly misjudged the opposition. Opportunistic priests in Florence announced from their pulpits that Galileo was spouting dangerous new ideas. A chorus of jealous academics, bruised by Galileo's arrogance, joined the clamor. Galileo counted on his Medici patrons to protect him, but that protection started to erode when the Grand Duke Cosimo's mother began to have doubts.
One of Galileo's young protégés was teaching mathematics and astronomy, Benedetto Castelli, and he got invited to one of the intellectual brunches that Cosimo's mother, the Grand Duchess Christina, was wont to put on. And so the conversation got around to these satellites of Jupiter.
Galileo had named the moons of Jupiter for the Medici family, but the Grand Duchess questioned their authenticity.
Are they real? Oh yes, said Castelli, even the Jesuits down in Rome have confirmed this. And then she switched the subject. She said, what about Copernicus? And what about Joshua at the Battle of Gibeon, when he commanded the sun and not the earth to stand still?
In the book of Joshua, the Lord halts the movement of the sun, allowing the Israelites a bit more daylight to defeat their enemies. This and a half dozen other biblical passages seem to suggest that it was the sun which moved, not the earth. The Grand Duchess Christina worried that her new court philosopher was contradicting the Bible. Galileo answered Madama Christina with a letter that went far beyond astronomy.
Yeah, I agreed with Madama Christina that the Holy Scripture never lies. That the decrees contained therein are absolutely true and inviolable. Now, I should have added that though the Scripture never errs, its interpreters and expounders are liable to err in many things when they base themselves always on the literal meaning of the words.
Galileo was honest when he said that if the Bible seemed to say something different from what science said, then you had just misinterpreted the Bible.
I believe that the Holy Writ exists in order to persuade men of the truths necessary for salvation. It's not necessary that the same God that gave us our speech and our senses, our intellects, would have us put aside those things. Particularly in the case of science, where it's not the smallest mention in the Holy Bible. If the sacred scribes meant to teach men astronomy, then why did they leave it out?
Galileo's outspoken letter to Madama Christina, intended to resolve the discrepancies between science and the Bible, came to be seen as an assault on the Bible itself.
And that letter gets circulated, and local priests read it, and they're outraged, and they're sending copies to Rome, and they're saying to people at the Inquisition, you should investigate Galileo, you should do something about this guy's a heretic.
Galileo surely knew what could happen to heretics when the cardinals of the Inquisition organized to purify society by combating heresy. Much of their work was the banning of books, but the Inquisition also had the powers of both torture and execution. Rome's dungeons had seen the end of many heretics, including the infamous Giordano Bruno, fallen priest and occult dabbler in science. To the Inquisition, extreme measures were justified. Whatever pain was inflicted to save the soul of a heretic was nothing compared to the pain of eternal damnation.
One of the things that the papacy wants to show to a united Europe, Catholics above all, is that there's no tolerance for dissent, that dissent will be rooted out and punished. A Scottish heretic is burned at the stake with a pitch shirt so that he'll burn all the more brightly. And Bruno, who's burned alive, which is quite unusual. Most people are burned when corpses, is one of a whole series of people who are put to death as a way of showing that orthodoxy will be enforced.
Giordano Bruno was a priest and a New Age charlatan who denied the divinity of Christ. But like Galileo, he had described a vision of the universe which had the earth spinning around the sun.
There's been a lot of different views as to how much the Bruno parallel weighed on Galileo. Undoubtedly, it must have had some influence. He realized, of course, what had happened to Bruno. I doubt if he thought himself to be in danger of that, but at the same time, there was that looming thing in the background that if he defied the Inquisition here, he could suffer very severe penalties.
Behind Bruno's execution was Rome's greatest inquisitor, the hammer of heretics, Roberto Cardinal Bellarmine. Now, years later, this same Cardinal Bellarmine was receiving reports about Galileo.
Church theologians have been alert to the possible implications of what Galileo is doing. And there is slowly somewhat of a Galileo file building in Rome, in the Inquisition. And as these noises coming from the lower tier of the clergy in Florence become louder and louder and louder in Rome, Galileo goes to Rome to try to argue his case.
I decided to stand openly alone on the theatre of the world, to bear witness to the sober truth. I believe that good philosophers, like eagles, fly alone, not in flocks, like starlings. I wanted people to understand that nature not only gave them eyes to see her works, but brains to make them capable of understanding them.
Galileo journeyed to Rome in the winter of 1616. As a member of the Medici court, he became a guest of the Tuscan ambassador at the palatial Villa Medici. Perched on a hill overlooking the city, from his balcony, Galileo could see the domes of the Vatican as he eagerly awaited his meeting with the Inquisitor, Cardinal Bellarmine.
Galileo tended to overestimate his own powers of persuasion. He thought that if he could go down to Rome and talk to some of the hierarchy, he could easily persuade them to remain open on the question of was the earth moving or was the earth fixed.
Theologians listened as Galileo confidently made the case for Copernicus.
Galileo is fully committed to the Copernican theory, and we mustn't see the church there as a monolith. I mean, he goes to see bishops and cardinals and theologians, and he argues his case, of course, very passionately. However, the Medici ambassador to the Vatican is writing home, listen, Galileo needs to be calm, to shut up, not go around, arguing his case so much.
In his letter, The ambassador worried that the Medici family might be drawn into an ugly controversy.
Galileo is passionately involved in this fight of his, and he may well get himself in serious trouble, along with anyone who supports his views. This business is not a joke, and the man is staying here under our protection.
He thought he could convince the more open-minded theologians in Rome of the merits of the Copernican